I have to counter the unfortunate myths that have been just promoted rampantly, that the sun is evil, like we evolved to be not in a beautiful harmony with our planet, our solar system, our sun. Human life began near the equator, where you had the most sun exposure, the most warmth, the parts of the planet that have the most life, the most diversity of plant life and animal life, is where there is the most sun exposure. When you go to the northern climes, you have far less diversity and far less life forms living in those kind of climates. It turns out that the sun and human life and all life on this planet are in a beautiful symbiotic harmony when it's done properly. Everything is about proper balance, right? You can die from water, but you cannot live without water. And we are now trying, and not even trying, we just are living without our sun. So let's talk about that. The sun does what for us? The sun, it it gives us life, okay? Without the sun, we really are unhealthy. And one of the reasons why we have massive issues with health is because we are not out in the sun. And when we are out in the sun, we are coating ourselves with sunscreen. So for example, sunscreen with an FPS of 30 will block 95 to 98% of the UV ultraviolet B waves. Now, there's UVA and there's UVB. The UVA is the primary type of sunlight that we have learned has evolved to give us, for example, melanoma. And that is, we don't want unlimited amounts of UVA. UVB is essential for our bodies to make vitamin D. Vitamin D is sometimes considered actually a hormone. It is essential for so many functions in the body. And I'm going to talk about what vitamin D does in the body in other shows. But today I want you to understand that vitamin D is not optional. Vitamin D is essential for health. It actually is involved in calcium and phosphate metabolism. It's involved in virtually every metabolic function in our body and in musculoskeletal health. A lot of you know that vitamin D is important for bone health. That is a fraction of what it is involved with, virtually every metabolic function. In fact, it's so important that although the bulk of vitamin D is actually made in our livers, now, how is that? How is that happening? Well, it turns out that when the sunlight hits our skin, the epidermal layer, the most superficial layer, has in it enzymes that can convert a type of cholesterol, okay, a form of cholesterol that forms in the skin, and it's converted into preformed vitamin D and into then vitamin D. And then vitamin D goes to the liver, where it's converted into the form of vitamin D, which circulates in the body, which is called 25-hydroxy vitamin D, and also into the metabolically active form of vitamin D, which then circulates. But so much more happens. It turns out that vitamin D in the skin is also converted into other products, which have other amazing important functions in our skin, actually can protect our skin from cancer. They are like anti-cancer products that reside in the skin. And after sun exposure, the vitamin D and the pre-vitamin D that's formed in the skin, in the epidermal, the superficial layer of the skin, is in the cells themselves and cannot be washed off. That's why you could go out in the sun and you can shower, you can wash, and that will not eliminate the vitamin D that's formed, because it's in the cells themselves. But not only does the liver convert vitamin D to its active metabolic form, so do many other cells and organs in the body, because vitamin D is so essential for many, many functions in the body. We now know that when you have low levels of vitamin D, what happens? You increase your risk for cardiovascular disease, many types of cancer, emotional issues, even schizophrenia, The bone health, of course. So it is involved in diabetes, metabolic health. It's involved in so many different functions in the body. Vitamin D, many consider like a hormone, as I mentioned. It's essential for health. Now, you may say, well, who cares about the sun, right? We can just take a pill. We can take a pill as a vitamin D substitute. That is not the same. Definitely, it is better than not having any vitamin D in your body or very, very low levels, but it's not a substitute for getting vitamin D from the sun because, as I mentioned, vitamin D is metabolized, and so is the preform of vitamin D in our skin into other products which act as anti-cancer agents in our skin. And actually, when you get that tan color, we have malign melanin. Melanin is also cancer protective, and we don't even know all the different functions. But vitamin D in the skin, formed from sunlight, is really essential for skin health. So we do not want to block, like with, if we all the time go out with sunscreen on, then we will make very, very little vitamin D. In fact, even an SPF of 8 will block the vast majority of vitamin D production in our skin. So it's okay if you're out for the day, if you're out in the sun all the time, to put on an environmentally safe sunscreen. But if it's worn all the time, or if we were always covered up, or we're always in the shade, or we're wearing a big hat, we will not produce the essential vitamin D. As well, if you swallow a vitamin D pill, much of that never gets used by the body properly. It's actually absorbed and goes into the lymphatic system and gets carried around the body in a different form through what are called chylomicrons. It's not the same as when you make it in your skin. It's not even transported around the body the same way. And much of it gets bound up in different fashion through the lymphatic system, and it doesn't even get into the circulatory system from the lymphatic system properly. So much of that is not really right. Now, let's talk about some of the other things. We're going to come back a little bit to issues with vitamin D and the sun, because once we establish without question that the sun is essential to making vitamin D, which is essential to health, and that the vitamin D in our skin is really important. It's not, you can't just pop a pill and make it the same. It's not going to be the same. So, well, let's talk about some of the other things that that the sun can do besides just helping to make vitamin D in our skin. Did you know that when you are exposed to sunlight, that it actually increases beta endorphins? The sun is like a happy pill. If you get sunlight, it will make you happy. So who has spent a day out in the sun and not felt better? Who has spent a day cooped up in a dark, closed up room and felt happier? Okay, we are born to be in the sun. The sun actually makes us happy. We not only feel happier, we live better. So if you get sunlight in the morning sun, and then you also get some sunlight in the middle of the day, your circadian clock is then properly aligned with the rotation of the earth, and you will sleep better at night. Have you ever spent a day out in the sun at the beach or at an amusement park, and when you got home, it's not like you were doing any physical labor. I mean, you were going on a ride, or you were actually lying on the beach, just getting in the rays, and then you slept like a baby that night. You just fell asleep. Or if you're out on a boat in the sun, you're just out in the park, you sleep so much better because it calms you down, you feel happier, and it helps to set your circadian clock so that you're in alignment with the rotation of the earth. So sunlight is amazing for that. What about other things? Did you know that the sun can help with clearing up certain diseases? For example, psoriatic plaques. Have you heard of psoriasis? It's an autoimmune condition of the skin which can cause these really unpleasant, uncomfortable, and unsightly plaques on the skin. Sunlight helps. Sometimes the sun is actually harnessed by doctors and they call it phototherapy. But the reality is that this has been recognized. Go back to the Greeks. They had solariums. They actually recognized the value of being out in the sun. The sun was cherished. And in fact, there is a type of therapy that is called heliotherapy. Helios for the Greek name for the sun god. So heliotherapy goes back thousands of years that people recognize the therapeutic value of the sun in so many ways. Did you also know that if you have a dysbiotic gut, have you heard about that? So many people now have the wrong bacteria growing in their colon. They have overgrowth of bacteria in their small intestine. And if you go out in the sun and you lie there and you expose your belly to the sun, it actually can help kill bacteria and help with a leaky gut and help with a dysbiotic gut. So who would think about that, right? But the sun is healing and it can kill bacteria. They used the sun many times in the past to help kill bacteria so that things would not be harmful to us. And another interesting thing, talking about killing bacteria, body odor is caused by bacterial overgrowth. So if you get a lot of sun and you get sun on your arms and in your axilla, your underarm areas, that can help reduce body odor. So being out in the sun, if you ever wonder, like, how did old civilizations, I mean, did everyone smell really bad? They didn't, because they were out in the sun. The sun killed that yucky body odor producing bacteria. So everyone smelled good. That's why they didn't feel like they had to use antiperspirants. They had natural antibacterial sunlight to keep odor under control. Another thing happened. Now, vitamin D is about much with health. And I mentioned it's about muscular skeletal health, particularly the bones. In prehistoric days, in earlier civilizations, and in agricultural communities, children were out in the sun all the time. But then over time, in the 1600s, they started having cities with buildings that were closer together and it was darker. And especially in Northern Europe, children developed rickets. It was the first time that rickets was discovered. And they didn't know what was the cause. It wasn't for a long time later, in the early 1800s, that there was a brilliant discovery. Of course, somebody observed that children living in an inner city, like in London, where there were a lot of tall buildings, closely packed together, children didn't get too much sun, and London is at a northern latitude, which we'll talk about latitude and how that affects the sun. And they've looked at children who were living on farms and found the children on the farms did not have rickets, but the children in London did. But they didn't really still know exactly what to do about it. And then fast forward into the early 1800s, they actually created solariums where they took children and put them on rooftops to help them to get the vitamin D they needed by being exposed to the sun. In the inner cities, they would take the children and put them up on the rooftops. They realized that that would prevent the development of rickets. Then later on, fast forward, they started putting vitamin D into milk because children were always drinking milk, and that pretty much eradicated the problem of rickets. Rickets is where the bones become very soft, they don't calcify properly, and children are very bow-legged. Now, vitamin D is so critical for the formation of a proper skeleton that it's not just about walking, it's actually about reproducing. Remember, the prime directive of life is what? Reproduction and survival. Well, in order for a woman to develop a proper pelvis where it's wide enough and strong enough, and also because vitamin D is about muscle strength as well. It's the whole musculoskeletal system, that in order, because it's about calcium, which has to do with muscle strength. So in order for women to be able to have babies naturally, they needed to have a properly formed pelvis, and they needed to have good muscle strength to really push the babies out and have a pelvis that would accommodate a baby passing through. And I think, and I really think that one of the reasons why we have such an increased rate of cesarean sections now for women having their babies is because they have such low levels of vitamin D. We check, all doctors now. I was one of the early ones checking vitamin Ds. Nobody knew what the heck that was, but now pretty much everyone's checking it. And they're finding very low levels in women, of course, in everyone, but I'm speaking now of women of childbearing age. So they're in children. You go back to the formation in utero. So women are making babies while they have low levels of vitamin D. Those babies, the little girl babies, are not going to form proper bones and pelvises, and they themselves do not have proper bones and pelvises. So we're getting into a problem where women cannot seem to have babies naturally because their pelvises aren't right. So we need to get our children out in the sun, not to have a burn. We're going to talk about that. We don't want to burn anyone. We want to have just the right dose. So now, unbelievably, there is a growing incidence of rickets in today's society. Isn't that insane? We're having rickets now? How could that be? Because women are being taught that the sun is dangerous and will hurt their children and give them skin cancer. And so they're slathering their babies with sunscreen from the day they're born. And we won't even go into on this particular program the issues of toxicity from some of the sunscreens out there. But the fact is that children need to develop healthy skeletons, and they're not when they're covered with sunscreen. And there are actually children, often from affluent families, that are developing rickets. I mean, this is really criminal. And I have had patients who've had melanomas, and they're told by their dermatologist, you must stay totally out of the sun. And I checked their vitamin D levels, which should optimally be about 50, and their levels are like 6 or 10. Now, this is putting these people at actual greatly increased risk for getting cancers because vitamin D helps protect against cancer. Having a burn is not the same as having sun exposure. So let's cover that. If you are fair-skinned, you want to have sun exposure to about 20 minutes, even less if you're very, very fair-skinned, maybe even as little as 10 minutes to make enough vitamin D. It doesn't take that much if you're very fair-skinned. And this is during the time, preferably like 11 in the morning until 1. If you go out in the sun before 10 in the morning or after 3 in the afternoon, you will get virtually no UVB light. And that is what you need, the UVB radiation. The UVA will not do it. You need UVB, and that is only out between 10 and 3, and preferably between 11 and 1. If that's the time you get the UVB light, which will make the vitamin D. So when you hear go out in the early morning or go out in the afternoon, that's fine for some things from the sun, but not for making vitamin D. So if you're fair-skinned, you only go out for 10 to 20 minutes. You want to get a little red. You don't want to burn, okay? Now, if you're very dark-skinned, like an African American or a type 5 skin, like an Asian skin, those people need more sun. Remember, humans have evolved initially around the equator, and they had very dark skin because they had such tremendous intense sun exposure. And so their bodies evolved to create a lot of melanin to protect them, because melanin is protective, but it also blocks the UVB. So they need more sun exposure. And so it could be at least 30 minutes or even up to an hour. So in order to get actual adequate sun exposure, it's been shown that you can get, if someone is exposed properly to the sun, their typical vitamin D serum levels will be close to 50. So that seems to be about the optimal level that we want if you're testing blood levels. I know that the Institute of Medicine came out saying you don't need more than about 20. That is not about health. That's about survival. You'll be alive, but you're not going to be really optimally healthy. And that's what we are all about. We're talking about optimal health, not just being alive, okay? And we want to not have some of the bad things that will happen if you have low levels of vitamin D. So let's talk about some of the things that can reduce your ability to make vitamin D. One thing is the time of day that you're exposed to the sun. Remember, I just told you that you need to get out in the middle of the day. If you live in a northern climate, now that would be 33 degrees latitude, either above or below, you will not get much UVB in the winter. In fact, in Boston, which is about 42 degrees latitude, you will get no UVB at any time of the day, between November through February. And if you're in Bergen, Norway, a full 6 months of the year, no matter how much you're out in the sun, you will get no UVB. And you can say, why is that? Why is that? Well, 98% of all the UVB rays are absorbed by the ozone layer. Only 1% ever gets to Earth. And the angle that it comes in to the Earth actually can determine how much gets there. And at the angle, when you're above 33-degree latitude, much of it does not get through. Another thing is altitude. So living at a high altitude, also the angle changes so that you do not get very good vitamin D. So you can't make it. You don't get the UVB light does not through very well at very high altitudes. That's another thing to be aware of, especially if you live at a very high altitude, that it's going to be harder for you to make vitamin D. Another thing that happens is aging. Older people, they've done studies, they do not make vitamin D well, even when in the sun. So they need extra sun exposure. Another problem is air pollution. So if you live in an area that has heavy air pollution, even if you're out in the sun, the air pollution absorbs the UVB and it doesn't get to your skin. Also, glass, plexiglass, plastic, that, if you think you're in the, like looking through a window and you're getting UVB and you're going to get vitamin D, think again. The UVB light is completely absorbed by those surfaces. It will not come to you. It will not get in. So, in summary, you need the sun. The sun gives life. You go back and ancient creatures, phytoplankton, okay? That's an ancient, early organism, like the earliest plant life on this planet was designed to make vitamin D from the sun. This is existing in the earliest creatures that evolved on Earth. We evolved as humans to live in the sunlight. It kills bacteria. It gives us joy. It helps us to sleep at night. It gives us the critically important vitamin D that we need. And we're going to talk in other programs about all the specifics of what vitamin D does. So you need the right dose depending on your skin type, either from as little as 10 minutes to as long as an hour. And you have to look for just to see a little redness, and then you'll test and see how much. And it's really not essential that you put your you put your face in the sun. You can cover your face if you prefer, but you got to expose your body. So the best thing is to wear the tiniest bikini. You can do it in your backyard, or if you don't want anyone to see you, just do it where no one can see you, or you're anonymous, and get sun on your body. Okay, if you're all covered up, it's not going to work. Use sunscreen only when you're out for longer periods of time. Make sure it's an environmentally safe one. And enjoy being out. Get out of your cave, folks. Don't be locked in. Take a walk in the midday when you're at lunchtime, and do not have sunblock on at that time. Roll up your sleeves if you can, and recognize that you probably will need vitamin D as a pill as well. Get your level checked. Optimal is about 50. So that's it for tonight. I hope to see you soon. I'll be putting out my schedule for my shows for August coming up, and I'm looking very forward to seeing you again. Have a great night.